Chairman, the Honorable Audley Shaw, Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, Prime Minister of Grenada, Dr. the Right Honorable Keith Mitchell, Premier of Montserrat, the Honorable Donaldson Romeo, Chief Minister of Anguilla, the Honorable Victor Banks, Chief Secretary, Tobago House of Assembly, the Honorable Orville London, Ministers of Government, Governors of the Caribbean Development Bank, members of the Board of Directors of the Caribbean Development Bank, Vice President Jorge Familiar of the World Bank, other representatives of the development community, members of the Diplomatic Corps, staff of the Caribbean Development Bank, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, I must say that we regret, as much as Minister Shaw does, his short tenure as chairman of the Board of Governors. But I can assure Minister Shaw that if he does as good a job as Minister of Finance as he has done as chairman here, his tenure in that position will be much longer. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of the Board of Governors, the Board of Directors, and the management and staff of the Caribbean Development Bank, thank you for hosting this 46th annual meeting of our Board of Governors here in Montego Bay, Mr. Chairman. This morning, I want to publicly congratulate you, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, for successfully leading your Jamaica Labour Party to victory in the recent general elections and for your appointment as Prime Minister. I assure you, sir, and the Jamaican people of the continued support of the CDB to your government as you strive to improve living standards in your country. Let me also take this opportunity to welcome Brazil, which became the newest regional non-borrowing member of CDB in December 2015 and is now attending its first annual meeting in that capacity. Please join me in recognizing the presence of Mr. Rodrigo Cavallo, alternate governor for the Federal Republic of Brazil. Ladies and gentlemen, Montego Bay is an exciting Caribbean tourist destination. It is also a part of Jamaica whose history exemplifies the indomitable spirit and determination of our Caribbean people to achieve economic empowerment and freedom from oppression. Samuel Sharp, one of Jamaica's national heroes and a former slave, led the Christmas Rebellion of 1831, which expedited the abolition decree that ended slavery a few years later. For his efforts, Sharp paid the ultimate price when he was hanged at the square in Montego Bay, which now bears his name. So passionate was he in defense of freedom for all slaves that he uttered the famous last words, "I would rather die on yonder gallows than live as a slave." I believe, ladies and gentlemen, that the struggles for emancipation from slavery and for political independence across the Caribbean were inspired by the desire of our people for self-determination and economic empowerment. Last year, as part of a global agenda for sustainable development, the international community embraced a vision for our world of societies that are peaceful, just, inclusive, resilient, and without abject poverty. Our Caribbean made a commitment to be part of this global movement. Ladies and gentlemen, this vision is one that would have resonated with Sam Sharp and with other Caribbean leaders who were at the forefront of the struggles for freedom and independence through the years. It is also a vision which the majority of our people would readily embrace today. This morning, I've set myself three main objectives. First, I'll provide a brief inventory of where our countries are today, highlighting their progress and the challenges that have constrained their development. Next, I'll suggest the priority issues around which we need to concentrate our energies in order to achieve our vision for our region. Then I'll share with you some of the work that our bank is doing in supporting the region's reform agenda. Where do Caribbean people find themselves in relation to this laudable vision? What is the reality of their circumstances? In general, Chairman, I believe that we can be justifiably proud of what our region has achieved since independence. Prior to the beginning of the 21st century, the majority of our countries reached middle-income status and ranked relatively high on the United Nations Human Development Index vis-à-vis other developing countries. That is the record. Good progress had been made in relation to the key development indicators, as most Caribbean countries moved towards full universal primary and secondary education. Life expectancy increased, child mortality rates fell, gender disparity in primary and secondary schools narrowed, and poverty, though still high, was on a definite downward trajectory. By the end of the 21st century, however, the Caribbean had started to lose ground, and a trend decline in the region's per capita growth rate had emerged. From 3.9% in the 1970s, the annual average per capita growth rate declined to 1.9% in the 1990s. As the global economy nosedived into recession in 2008, the slippage continued, and Caribbean economies remained weak even after global recovery commenced. High debt, rising unemployment, especially youth unemployment, and widening budget deficits became priority concerns for Caribbean policymakers. Today, our countries continue to be ranked among some of the most highly indebted, as we heard from both the Prime Minister and from the Minister of Finance. At the end of 2015, 4 of CDB's borrowing member countries had debt in excess of 100% of GDP. A comparison of CDB's borrowing member countries to other groupings suggests that non-Caribbean small island developing states fared much better than we did during the global recession. Between 2006 and 2015, Caribbean growth rates averaged 1.5% compared with 3.4% for other small island developing states. Small size then, ladies and gentlemen, does not appear to provide a robust explanation for the Caribbean's relatively low growth performance. Arguably, as a region, we have made progress, but we have fallen substantially short of realizing our true potential. That is a fact. I have just described a Caribbean whose mettle is being seriously tested at this time. The challenges notwithstanding, we have joined with the rest of the world in embracing this vision of a region that is peaceful, just, inclusive, resilient, and without abject poverty. Having a vision is important for understanding where we want to be. But ladies and gentlemen, as we well know, the vision is not the same thing as reality. Vance Havner reminds us that the vision must be followed by the venture. It is not enough, he says, to stair up the steps. We need to step up the stairs. The journey up the staircase to greater prosperity must begin with the pursuit of strategies that promote higher, more predictable, and more sustainable rates of economic growth. Brazil, Chile, China, Panama, and Singapore are often cited as countries which have successfully transformed their economies, distinguished by, among other things, sustained periods of high GDP growth. The facts inevitably lead us to the conclusion that we have not been growing fast enough, nor have we been able to sustain growth long enough. Our overall growth performance has consistently lagged behind the rest of the world's. Our region has grown by only 1.2% per year since 2009, compared with the global average of 3.7%. It is estimated that Caribbean countries, principally the larger ones, will need to make the shift from current incremental rates of growth of 1.2% to transformational rates of growth of at least 5 to 7% per annum in order to create the basis for ending abject poverty by 2030. Those are also the facts. Given the prevailing high levels of inequality, the more aggressive growth rates will also need to be A, accompanied by distributional policies that spread wealth more equitably. B, reinforced by an enlightened and efficient social policy which targets the most vulnerable in society, mainly women and children. As is now more widely appreciated, a dynamic private sector driving economic growth is a distinguishing feature of economies which have been successfully transformed. Perhaps less well understood is that in this paradigm, the state does not wither away. Rather, it assumes, among other things, the role of enabler by investing in growth-inducing infrastructure, which is climate-proofed, retrofitting, and over time, older infrastructure to make it climate resilient. Achieving fiscal and debt sustainability in order to build private sector confidence. And C, creating a streamlined governance and regulatory framework to facilitate business activity. Although these, ladies and gentlemen, are not new concepts, they warrant repetition. Once macroeconomic stability is achieved, it has to be sustained. And business reforms need to be relentlessly pursued, taking cognizance of emerging new technologies and the changing needs of business. Some well-known measures of competitiveness, including the Doing Business Index and the Global Competitiveness Index, still point to major weaknesses in the regulatory and governance frameworks that hinder entrepreneurship and undermine the Caribbean's competitiveness. For the most part, our exporters have difficulty competing globally, even in areas where there is distinct comparative advantage, unless they receive support from special regimes. Jamaica was ranked number 64 in the 2016 Doing Business Index, the highest ranked Caribbean country for the second consecutive year. This country has introduced a number of structural benchmarks in an effort to improve overall competitiveness. Enhancements in the institutional and regulatory environment have led to a reduction in the processing time for some business transactions. A number of recent surveys point to growing domestic business confidence here. However, ladies and gentlemen, a world ranking of 64 for the highest placed Caribbean country, whilst showing commendable progress, also implies that there is plenty room for improvement. A concerted effort is needed by each borrowing member country to target those measures which will have the greatest incremental impact on business facilitation. Mr. Chairman, a feature of investor confidence is its inherent fragility. Another Jamaican national hero, Norman Manley, spoke to the ephemeral nature of this aspect of human behavior when he famously reminded his people that confidence is something that you must build up patiently in a skeptical and suspicious world, and in atmospheres that are even hostile and doubtful. Confidence, he says, is something that you build up year after year. It takes 50 years to grow a tree, but a fool can cut it down in 2 hours. Ladies and gentlemen, these are words to the wise. I turn now to the composition of the human resource pool, which will enable the rapid and diversified development of our economies. A country's education system plays a central role in enhancing its competitiveness and supporting stronger economic growth. Successful economies tend to invest the most in their human resources. They are also most likely to have excellent education systems with very strong feedback loops between academic, research institutions, industry, and commerce. According to the World Bank, between 60 and 90% of the growth achieved in Japan and other East Asian industrialized countries is explained by human capital rather than financial means or natural resources. The reform of the education system in the Caribbean in support of robust and resilient economic growth will have to achieve a closer alignment between the needs of the productive sector and the output of the education system. This is not dissimilar to what obtains in the fast-growing countries of the world. The alignment will need to take place with greater emphasis on technical and vocational education and science, technology, engineering, and mathematics subjects generally. It will be nimble, that is the education system, and responsive to the changing labor market needs, so that a continuous pipeline of appropriately skilled talent will be available for business expansion. Chairman, I stressed earlier the indispensable role of macroeconomic stability and a business-friendly governance reform structure in creating business confidence, entrenching resilience, and spurring economic growth. But sustainable, resilient economic growth requires more. The structure of our economies is one of our biggest challenges. Production is too heavily concentrated in a few economic sectors with insufficient linkages across them. A similar structure obtains in the wider regional market, with relatively few linkages amongst domestic businesses and those in other Caribbean territories. Consequently, not many Caribbean enterprises are engaged in meaningful exports of a scale that could alter existing trade imbalances. This skewed production structure undermines our resilience and renders our economies vulnerable to the vagaries of the natural environment and to external economic shocks. Non-traditional agriculture, in my judgment, can play a key role in transforming Caribbean economies, spurring their development, increasing food security, expanding export earnings, creating jobs, and improving livelihoods. Agriculture remains the main employer in many Caribbean countries, accounting for approximately 16% of overall employment in our region. However, much of the non-traditional agriculture sector remains low value adding, low tech, low productivity, and inefficient. Recent studies have confirmed that a restructured and modernized agriculture can be a driver of economic growth in many of our countries. These would include Belize, Guyana, Jamaica, Haiti, Suriname, and also some of the OECS countries. With the appropriate reorientation and investment, this sector can increase employment, earn foreign exchange through export and expansion, and save foreign exchange by strengthening linkages between the domestic agricultural supply chains and dynamic sectors such as tourism and manufacturing. But the tourism and export-focused manufacturing sectors compete internationally, and they require products that meet international standards. Domestic agriculture, therefore, will need to be transformed to be competitive with the rest of the world on price and on quality. For agriculture, that transformation means access to affordable, irrigable water, preferably pumped by renewable energy. Its enabling infrastructure will include sustainably engineered feeder roads, appropriate packing and storage facilities, and last but not least, access to credit. This transformation will also see the adoption of modern technology to improve productivity. This new agriculture, Chairman, if holistically transformed and integrated into the dynamic growth sectors, can be a component of a more diversified and resilient domestic economy. Chairman, I now turn to the issue of energy. Energy costs have for a long time been a vexing issue for Caribbean economies, with the possible exception of Trinidad and Tobago. Not only have high and volatile petroleum prices adversely impacted competitiveness, but their volatility has posed real challenges for national economic management. Over the years, the competitiveness of the mining and tourism sectors, both of which are energy intensive, has been adversely affected by oil price volatility. The shift to renewable energy and energy efficient technologies has been gathering momentum across the Caribbean. Utility scale generating plants using solar PV, wind, and hydropower are now emerging in several of our countries. Similarly, distributed generation, mostly with wind and solar PV, is being deployed in manufacturing plants, hotels, and office complexes. This is having a noticeable impact on energy costs and is introducing much needed stability in the cost structure of these enterprises. Encouragingly, the cost of these technologies, as we heard last night, is rapidly falling, making the adoption even more attractive. This, for me, is a classic case of transformation that can have a deep and long-term impact on our region. The Caribbean, in my judgment, has now unmistakably begun a process of reaching for higher levels of energy independence and building buffers against price volatility. Ladies and gentlemen, we heard last night about the importance of telling a story, and I'll tell you a little story which I think illustrates much of what I've been trying to say up to this point. The story is of the transformation that is now taking place at the iconic Red Stripe Bear enterprise here in Jamaica. It is a good one for pulling together several of the strands of the case that I'm making and for laying the basis for dynamic economic growth. Red Stripe has embarked on the replacement of up to 20% of the imported barley which it uses in its production process to be replaced by domestically produced cassava starch. This will require 48,000 tons of cassava per year, compared with current production of 17,000 tons in Jamaica as a whole today. The shift to cassava, a raw material produced right here in this country will add 100 direct jobs on the company's cassava farms and provide employment for a further 3,000 workers for outsourced cassava production. The decision to produce beer for the US market here in Jamaica rather than overseas also increases employment opportunities at the local manufacturing facilities. This change taking place at this local enterprise is the direct result of what Chairman of the Board of Directors Richard Biles describes as, and I quote, a more competitive country today on the world market than it was years ago as a result of improvements in macroeconomic and doing business environments. Equally important is the company's investment in a cogeneration plant. This is energy efficiency, which has reduced energy costs by 50% and cut water usage by 17%. On the agricultural side, investment in new varieties and production methods for cassava has dramatically increased yields and reduced the unit cost of the raw material. This case study, Chairman, is an excellent example of how the growth drivers discussed this morning can be brought together to transform several critical economic sectors in one fell swoop. Its importance also is that it is a model that can be replicated in many Caribbean countries. The financing requirements, now, Chairman, that are required for economic transformation, which were outlined this morning, are going to be substantial. Much of it will be provided, of course, by an appropriately incentivized private sector. But the financing for some components of the transformation strategy can more cost-effectively be sourced through multilateral institutions like the Caribbean Development Bank. This is in part because a global framework for financing sustainable development has also accompanied the global agreement on a new sustainable development agenda. Let me say a few words about CDB's role in this regard. We will continue to provide assistance in traditional areas of social and economic infrastructure, as you made reference to this morning, Chair. At the same time, we have been seeking out new and innovative financing mechanisms that can increase our responsiveness to our country's needs in areas such as building resilience to climate change and reducing the over-reliance on high-priced fossil fuels. Technical assistance from the German government to develop our internal capacity in renewable energy is already beginning to pay dividends for us and for our borrowing member countries. Last year, we reached agreement with the UK's Department for International Development and the European Union's Caribbean Investment Facility to fund the sustainable energy for the Eastern Caribbean program. We also concluded an agreement with the Inter-American Development Bank for the Sustainable Energy Facility, or CEF, for the Eastern Caribbean, with a focus on the development of geothermal energy. These are just two examples of initiatives to foster energy security, diversify the energy matrix, and improve the competitiveness of beneficiary countries in the Eastern Caribbean. In March, we were accredited to the Adaptation Fund, and we expect that accreditation to the Green Climate Fund will follow shortly. These developments will unlock resources for investment in climate-resilient infrastructure and in sustainable energy. You heard earlier from Minister Shaw, ladies and gentlemen, about the establishment of the UK Caribbean Infrastructure Fund. And this is worthy of mention. Infrastructure investment provides a solid platform for economic growth. This £300 million fund of grant resources for 9 eligible Caribbean countries will help to address deficiencies in vital infrastructure such as roads, bridges, and water supply, with CDB as the executing agency. By seeking to partner with us on these initiatives, our development partners are signaling their confidence in the bank to be an effective channel for delivering development assistance to the borrowing member countries. In keeping with the focus on climate resilience, our board of directors approved 2 projects of special note at its meeting on Monday this week. One project will finance the installation of LED street lamps in St. Lucia, which will reduce energy consumption and the total quantity of oil imports, as well as lower the street lighting electricity bill by almost 60%. The second approval is for an exploratory drilling project for geothermal energy in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. This is the first of what we expect to be a number of other developments in the geothermal energy sector as the OECS countries move aggressively to develop this abundant indigenous energy resource. Chairman, in closing, I have appealed to pragmatism. I have sought to make the case that our people can realize the vision of a Caribbean that is peaceful, just, inclusive, resilient, and without abject poverty. I have argued that we can make this vision a reality by creating the foundations of a competitive and resilient private sector-driven economy through adoption of appropriate suite of macroeconomic and business-friendly reforms, closer alignment of our education system to the needs of the productive sector, climate-proofing critical social and economic infrastructure against natural hazards, diversifying our economies by developing new sectors such as renewable energy and energy efficiency, and modernizing traditional ones such as agriculture, and last but not least, building efficient and targeted social safety nets for the most vulnerable in our societies. Is this a realistic dream? Is it achievable? Or is it simply the proverbial impossible dream? Mr. Chairman, I am satisfied that the success of other countries within our hemisphere can be a reliable beacon for us. We can also find hope in the efforts of small countries like Grenada, like St. Kitts and Nevis, which after being ravaged by natural disasters and the resulting accumulation of large sovereign debts, have taken the bitter medicine, pursued the right policies, and are now experiencing better outcomes. We can also take encouragement from the green shoots now beginning to appear right here in Jamaica. After more than 40 years of disappointing economic and social development, and after so many years of failing to capitalize on its vast endowment of natural and human capacity, there appears to be good reason to begin to exhale. Ladies and gentlemen, this country endured 4 years of punishing but impressive economic and structural reforms requiring huge sacrifices by its people. Today, Jamaica appears to be wrestling to the ground the twin monsters of sovereign indebtedness and fiscal unsustainability that have bedeviled it for much of its years as a sovereign nation. Many of the reforms described earlier for improving the business climate have been improved, and many more are now underway. Private investment is beginning to increase, nowhere more evident than in the vital tourism and renewable energy sectors, but encouragingly also in business process outsourcing and the local manufacturing sectors. Perhaps more encouraging for me as a Caribbean person in the emerging Jamaica story is the evidence of a maturing democracy. After a hard-fought national election, eschewing the traditional triumphalism, the new government appears to have embraced what was good in the previous dispensation and set about further galvanizing the nation around the task of realizing aggressive, transformational economic growth. The ultimate success of the Jamaica project can only serve as a symbol of hope and encouragement for the rest of our region, that the vision which we held out this morning is anything but the impossible dream. Mr. Chairman, I thank you.